Hey, everybody. Welcome to APUSH CRAM 5able. Oh, man, we are so excited to be here. We are covering period 9. We finally made it. We're at the end. We're finally at the period where I, Mr. Lagerway, am a primary source. Oh, I'm so excited. This is period 9, where you're a primary source. This is 1980 to the present. Buckle up. Strap yourselves in. Here we go. We're about to talk about all this goodness. Couple of preliminaries before we dive in too much, and that would be a reminder, this stream is being recorded, of course, might appear on our websites, YouTube, other public channels, etc. If you want to have your name be something else, do so now. It's a good idea. Follow Think 5able at all your favorite social media channels, etc. We'll get some additional lighting in here just so I'm a bit happier. I always like the light. Remember, stay loose, stay hydrated, stay focused, and we got it. We are less than a month away from the APUSH exam, but you got this. Don't worry. We're going to be with you the whole way, and you folks have been doing really good stuff. A couple of reminders about what we are doing. Well, first of all, we're covering Unit 9 tonight, and then we're going to move into some really awesome streams in the next couple of streams. I'm really excited about these. One of them is the exam tips and tricks, a.k.a. let's hack the exam. Not in terms of hacking as in we're going to computer something, but I mean how is the exam built? What does it look like? What's the structure? What's the frame? As someone who's graded these things and who has been a teacher on the other side of this for a good number of years, what do you need to know about what kind of questions they're going to ask or likely to ask? We're going to dive into that. Talk about dates, talk about study strategies. Hey-yo. And then we got two streams on FRQs. First one being on short answer questions on LEQs, and then the second one at a special Friday time at 8 p.m. Pay attention to those date changes, right? But the special one on Friday is FRQs Part 2 is going to be on DBQs, document-based questions. We're going to spend an entire stream just on that because we know that you have lots of questions about that. I've been hearing a lot of them. And, of course, the DBQ is pretty complex. A lot of moving parts, but we'll get there. And then we have our CRAM finale, 5 hours of goodness before the APUSH exam. It's coming up. But we got you covered there. I'll be joined by a fantastic partner who will be helping me out with some of that CRAM finale, and we'll get you covered with all the goodness. Also, a reminder that even after this stream is done, we still have the 5able forums going on Discord, so if you want to keep the conversation going, tonight we began at 8 o'clock, so that begins around 9, or a little bit after we finish, so it's a little bit not quite as late, so you can still get a good night's sleep before your school begins tomorrow. Alrighty, and what are we doing? Well, we're answering your frequently asked questions. Again, the ones that you're sending out to Thomasina, our fantastic TA. She is not only monitoring Discord throughout the week and all that stuff, but also there's an entire section just below this on the 5able website where there's a question and answer section. I will also open up the Vimeo live stream question and answer session. So if you're live and you want to ask it there, awesome. If you're watching this recorded later, there's still a conversation happening down below. So feel free to ask questions there, answer questions there, have a discussion about it. And then we're going to be talking about the Period 9 content. Period 9 is not that massive, so we won't be nearly as rushed as we were last week when we covered Period 8 in one whole hour-long stream. Doing some practice questions as usual, talking some study tips, and then question and answer from you folks. So there we go. Pretty excited. So some of the frequently asked questions that you folks have been giving to us and that Thomasina sent our way. Someone asked, I'm taking the paper exam and I'm not prepared to handwrite my answers. How do I improve my handwriting skills? Oh boy. Yeah. If you have been, here's the thing, right? I've been a reader in person when I've read handwritten essays, and I mean, I read about 800 of those every year or so. And there's maybe 3 that I'll say, ooh, I'm really having a hard time reading this, and then I'll pass it along to my table mates or to our table leader or things like that. So we will get it read. Just, first of all, let's calm down and say we will get it read no matter what. But I appreciate you asking the question and saying, look, I want to make this legible. I want to make it easier on my reader. The happier they are as they read my essay, the more likely they are to give me points. I mean, readers are highly trained and very professional, but we're also human. So, yeah, it's a good idea. And if we can't read it, we can't grade it. So, what do I suggest to improve your handwriting? I'd say slow down, prioritize. You don't want to be so focused on vomiting your vocabulary words down on the page that you completely forget how to write legibly. And then, of course, practice. There's nothing that can do better for your handwriting than practicing. And that might mean switching between cursive and print, seeing what works better for you, something like that. Make sure that you are doing as much practice as you possibly can. That'd be a good idea. And also, when it comes to prioritizing, remember, you can earn a whole lot of points, and we'll talk about this with the FRQ streams later, but you can earn a lot of points with a few paragraphs. So don't try to worry about writing a 5-page essay that no one can read. Write a 2-page essay that everybody can read. So there we go. Someone was asking, how could I develop a timeline of dates and events to apply the skills like contextualization on the exam? Chef's kiss. I'm so happy that someone asked this question because this segues really nicely into our next stream next week. First of all, I would start looking at the period bookend dates, aka, for this one, period 9, 1980 to the present. Okay, the present doesn't help so much. Shoot, that one doesn't work as well. But 1980. Why is 1980 important? And then from there, you can use that to sort of create buckets of each period. Go from there. We'll be discussing dates and which ones I think you should know, how you can memorize those, how you can use those and be useful in some of our subsequent streams. That's a good question, though. One of the best ways to memorize dates, again, I always recommend study technique of active recall. Make yourself some flashcards. Start with a few dates, start with the periods, and then work your way down to some of the more detailed ones. And nice job. Some people are already talking about this in the chat. Yes, 1980 is the election of Ronald Reagan. So nice job there, Evan. Nice work. Last question was, how can I identify the historical thinking skill, like causation, comparison, CCOT, to use in an LEQ? Well, the good news is, unlike a lot of older questions, they're not boxing you into a particular one. There is flexibility here. So you are able to write any of those three, which gets you one of the points on the LEQ rubric, of course, and then doing both sides of it is going to help you get complexity, or that's one avenue anyway. So we're going to talk about that in the next stream, but use the one that seems to make the most sense for you, and use the one that you feel like you can add the most complexity or nuance to. So don't worry about, oh man, this seems like it's definitely a comparison prompt, but I kind of want to write it as a CCOT. Maybe that's kind of a bad example, but I think CCOT and causation are frequently pretty close together. Don't worry about parsing the difference too much. Write one that makes sense, that answers the question directly. Always answer the question. That's what AP stands for, right? Answer the prompt. So, I'm joking, of course, it's answer advanced placement, but the other joke is that answer the prompt is a really big deal. So, make sure that you're doing that. We'll talk about that a little bit during the next stream as well as we cover the LEQs. So, great questions from you folks. Let's dive in and start talking about period 9. So here we go. Period 9. Technically it starts in 1980, as someone already said. Ronald Reagan. That's the election of Reagan. Sort of talking about the conservatism of the recent American political history. And then it goes till the present, but not really the present. I mean, most textbooks are going to end earlier, and most APUSH covers is going to end earlier. As you're going to see, some of the really, really big stuff, like what you need to be able to explain. Conservatism is a really big deal, politics and how it changes, tech economy and demography, so we're talking technological change, economic change, and then people. Demos meaning people, right? And then graphy meaning measuring, so people measuring. Who's where and why and what and how many. And then lastly, new foreign policy during the Cold War, but also after the Cold War as well. So a lot of that's pretty general, right? New foreign policy post-Cold War. Are we still post-Cold War? Yeah, sure. I'll be putting that stuff aside for now that we're talking about with Russia nowadays. Oh, that was just a terrible joke. Why did I even attempt that? But you get the idea that regardless of how much Cold War stuff there is, of course we're past the Cold War in particular, and so you could mention something that's as early as the Persian Gulf War, which is kind of during the end of the Cold War, all the way up to Afghanistan and the withdrawal under Biden that's going to be happening soon. So you have options, but I tend to end my class around 2010. It's not a good idea to be dropping a whole bunch of references to contemporary events, especially if it tends to be controversial or if it happens to just be so recent that it's not really history yet, right? It's still from the headlines. I mean, history is made every day, as the History Channel reminds us, as they continue to show us ice road truckers and all other sorts of reality TV shows. The sigh. But I would say go to 2010. After that, let's leave that to the historians to deal with and parse out a little bit later. But you have many options. So use the options that make sense. Let's talk about some of these items and keep going. So, the rise of conservatism. I'm going to frame it this way because I feel like this does a good job of contextualizing. There was a DBQ on the rise of conservatism a few years ago, and it framed it this way, so I find it helpful. This is not me taking a political stand. The College Board doesn't take a political stand on this kind of stuff, but it is handy to think of conservatism, at least beginning in 1980 as being a backlash to recent events. I mean, you can trace conservatism back further, of course. There's always been conservatives in American history. But these kind of conservatives are going to be dealing with a couple of particular issues, and they're also going to be a couple of particular groups. So, things like the New Deal, the Great Society. Conservatives don't like big government in the role of economics. They don't like big economic changes. So they're going to rebel against FDR's Great Society, FDR's New Deal, Johnson's Great Society. People like Barry Goldwater in 1964 are going to be really good earlier examples of this. They're also going to be rebelling against the counterculture. Notice no hippies with frisbees on college campuses. They are traditionalists. Conservatives believe there is good stuff that's already happening that needs to be conserved or carefully kept and not allowed to change too much. So the counterculture, the hippies, a lot of stuff that comes with that is like feminism, right? The sexual revolution, even civil rights. A lot of this is unfortunately going to involve some things that people may see as legitimate and some things that are definitely not legitimate. As in, some conservatives didn't like civil rights, and so they're going to rebel against that. In fact, one of the most important reasons that the religious right and the moral majority comes about is because the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, was threatening to yank the nonprofit status from some Christian colleges that were forbidding interracial dating or refusing to integrate or things like that. See Bob Jones University, etc. So a lot of this has to do with opposition to civil rights, which is super not cool. One can have legitimate discussions about hippies and frisbees and to what extent feminism has gone too far at times, and etc., etc. But sometimes it can get kind of sexist, sometimes it can get kind of racist. There are also some very controversial items like Roe v. Wade that happened in the 70s. Now, critically and rather controversially and not as well known, a lot of people associate the rise of the religious right, the moral majority, Jerry Falwell, etc., with Roe v. Wade. Although, remember, most evangelical Christians who we associate with being against abortion weren't actually against abortion right away. It only became weaponized and sort of politicized in the 1980 election. And so initially, it was seen as kind of a Catholic issue. And there were some that were against it, but a lot of it starts out with, again, more of that civil rights stuff. So it's very complex. And you can have your own opinion as to which of these things were worth backlashing against. We'll make that word up. But you should know several of these. There was some backlash against Carter. Remember President Jimmy Carter, whom we covered last time in the Period 8 stream. He's president from 1976 to 1977 to 81, if you include the inaugurations. And he's trying to conduct a bunch of peace deals. He does some good stuff, but a lot of conservatives see him as weak and see him as embarrassing America on the world stage, particularly because of things like stagflation that he's not able to take care of and the Iran hostage crisis. Oh boy. Yeah. And then we already mentioned the Christian right and the moral majority, but keep in mind that evangelical Christians, particularly white evangelical Christians, are going to be crucial for the rise of Reagan, the so-called values voters. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, wait a minute, value voters, Christian people voting for Reagan? Wasn't he like a divorced actor from Hollywood? Yes, there is some controversy, as we'll see later on, about whether a person's policies or their personal morality matter more, and that's a constant debate that they're going to be having throughout Period 8. So then, all of this leads to the rise of Reagan. Reagan is elected in 1980. He beats Carter, who runs for re-election and loses, and Reagan is elected president. And he is going to lead with the so-called Reagan Revolution, partly because of the influence that he has and his vice president is going to have, but also the continuation of conservatism is going to be a big shift. So remember during Period 8, we talked about the zenith, the high point of liberalism, let's say in the 60s with LBJ. Well, this is going to be the high point of conservatism, and there's a big shift, and it's going to continue for quite a while. And you'll even see that some of those echoes, or maybe choices, is it? Haha, that was a deep cut joke right there. Barry Goldwater's book, A Choice Not an Echo, his famous line. Anyway, either way, you're going to see a lot of echoes of this conservatism continuing to this day with presidents like George H.W. Bush and maybe even some President Trump stuff. So, what's Reagan known for? What do we need to know? Well, you have to be familiar with Reaganomics, right? A clever portmanteau, combination of words, of Reagan and economics. What does Reaganomics look like? Well, it's going to involve supply-side economics, not demand-side, but supply-side. The idea being, let's give tax cuts to the wealthy, let's give tax cuts to corporations. That way they'll be able to produce more, hire more people, keep going. Tax cuts are a big part of this, although he is going to raise taxes on some people sometimes. Generally, his ethos is tax cuts. Also, a lot of deregulation. This is something that you're probably familiar with if you follow American politics to this day. Republicans in general, and by the way, by this point, we've sort of just finished the separation that began in the 70s of now Republicans are typically fairly conservative and Democrats are typically more liberal. Well, conservatives and Republicans tend to like deregulation. Let's cut the red tape. Let's make it easier for businesses to operate. And let's get the government out of the way. Reagan famously says government is not the solution to the problem, it is the problem. And the scariest words you can hear are in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So he does not like the government wants to cut it down, at least in some areas, of course. Deregulation is a couple examples of that. Again, you don't have to know all of these. I'm just giving you some examples of some big topics here. The PATCO strike. This would be when Reagan fires a whole bunch of air traffic controllers, and he's going to severely weaken unions because of this. Yeah. And so that's going to be a classic conservative move, more against unions and more for deregulation, more pro-big business. He's going to try to do some cuts to domestic programs, trying to reform welfare, whom Reagan continues to argue that welfare is helping out poor people that don't deserve it, perhaps sometimes, and perhaps he has a point at some point, but he often uses some racial dog whistles to talk about that, and that gets all messy. So again, a lot of this is really messy and really controversial. There's going to be the AIDS crisis during this time, right? Unfortunately, AIDS is associated with gay men initially, and so a lot of people, especially more moral conservatives, are going to say, this is just God's judgment upon the gay community, which I know in 2021 sounds horrific, and it was horrific back then too, but that was pretty common for people to say, we don't have to worry about it, it's their problem. And so unfortunately, they don't do a whole lot about AIDS right away. There's also going to be a lot of military spending. And I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, Lagerway, I thought you talked about him cutting down the size of government as well as not liking government being big and spending a whole lot. Well, typical conservatism, as we're going to talk about throughout period 9, involves cuts to social services, cuts to economic regulation and government, but increases in military spending, in defense spending. And so Reagan is going to spend a whole lot more on the military. And this is controversial, but it could be related to actually ending the Cold War and spending the Soviets into the ground. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And try as he might, though, you need to know this one, too. This is straight from the College Board. There is continued resistance to him cutting social services like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And so a lot of those, despite some of his best efforts, sometimes continue on. So conservatism changes a lot about the government, installs a lot of conservative judges, cuts a lot of taxes, but a lot of this stuff like Social Security, entitlement spending, etc., is going to continue. So there you go. Conservatism, although, of course, continues after Reagan. It's not just Reagan. We're going to see it with his vice president, George H.W. Bush. That would be Bush 41, as we sometimes call him, or Bush Sr., because, spoiler alert, his son gets elected too. He's president for one term. Now, he's going to be somewhat conservative, but a little bit less so than Reagan. He's going to, remember, he famously says, read my lips, no new taxes, and then has to raise taxes. He deals with a little bit of the economic downturn after Reagan leaves office. Whether it was Reagan's fault or not is somewhat controversial. And then he's going to pass things like the Americans with Disabilities Act. So if you've seen curb cutouts, if you've seen ramps in different places, should be pretty much everywhere, handicap parking spaces, that's all thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a huge deal for our brothers and sisters with disabilities of some sort or in wheelchairs, etc. There you go. So that's a really big deal. Bill Clinton is going to be our next president, and if you haven't noticed yet, there's a lot of politics involved in period 9. Bill Clinton is going to be elected for 2 terms, and he is technically a Democrat, but he is a so-called new Democrat. He's going to use this thing called triangulation, where he tries to outflank the Republicans, outflank the conservatives by stealing some of their ideas. So Bill Clinton, even though he's a Democrat, is not going to be the typical liberal Democrat that you saw back in the 60s with Johnson, or even like a Carter. He's going to be a new Democrat. So he's going to do things like welfare reform. He's going to end welfare as we know it, as he said. And this is going to be sort of a conservative move to cut down on welfare a little bit. He's going to sign NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. leads to the movement of jobs, and it's pretty controversial. Does it hurt American economy? The American economy? Probably not. Does it hurt American workers? Most definitely. So it's kind of one of those balances between a micro and a macro level. What do you do? And then he's also going to institute things like don't ask, don't tell. That's related to LGBT people in the military. He says, look, we won't ask you and you don't tell us. So if you can't be openly gay in the military, but we also won't go on some sort of McCarthyism, pink scare or lavender scare witch hunt. So notice kind of a more conservative policy. Other things like DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, right? This is a very conservative policy, literally passing a law that says the federal government sees marriage as between one man and one woman. Thus the emoji there. That's a very conservative policy as well, coming from Congress, of course, but also from Bill Clinton, the president, who's a Democrat. And then finally, during his time, you need to be aware that there is a resurgence of the Republicans taking control of the House for the first time in a long time. For a long time, starting with FDR all the way through the 1990s, the Democrats have controlled the House. Not so in the Senate because, well, you've taken AP Gov maybe later, but the Senate is fairly skewed to rural and conservative states. So Republicans have controlled the Senate, but they haven't controlled the House for a long time, and they finally do in 1994. Midterm elections, and Newt Gingrich gets elected as Speaker of the House. He institutes a contract with America, and so there's more conservatism, and there's more incentive for Clinton to work with conservatives and to be conservative. And then continuing on with a lot of this stuff, there are going to be a lot of debates over immigration, diversity, gender, families, all those kinds of roles. So conservatives, I mean, think about modern day politics, right? You'll be able to talk about conservatives typically being less in favor of immigration, although Reagan did sign amnesty for undocumented immigrants, so it's complicated. Conservatives typically like a little bit less diversity because they say, hey, new immigrants need to assimilate to our ways, and not every immigrant can. So they tend to favor less immigration, less diversity. They tend to be a bit more typical or traditional in their gender roles, so more encouraging women to stay at home, take care of the kids, etc., and they believe in families and the importance of families. Perhaps it's a family value kind of thing, or perhaps it's just relying on the Defense of Marriage Act, that kind of stuff, so a lot of anti-LGBT stuff as well. But a lot of that gets pretty nuanced. So again, as I keep mentioning in all of these streams, don't lose the forest for the trees. Know that conservatism has a rise with Reagan. I'd be able to talk about the causes and the effects of conservatism. And there we go. Last thing you need to know about Reagan that's a really big deal is the end of the Cold War. It doesn't happen under Reagan's watch, but some people give Reagan credit for ending the Cold War. Well, first of all, a couple of things that aren't so great first that we should talk about. First of all is the Iran-Contra scandal. So remember we talked about during Period A, all those proxy wars happening all over the place. Excuse me. The United States does not get along with Iran. You know, see the Iran hostage crisis, etc. But they're also fighting a war with Iraq, and the United States is kind of unsure which side to take. Plus, the Contras are having problems with communists. Either way, the big purpose here is that the Reagan administration illegally sells weapons to anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua and gives that money to Iran to be able to, sells missiles to Iran and then uses that money to give to the anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua, and that's going to be highly illegal. There's some questions. Did Reagan know about it? Did George H.W. Bush know about it? And yeah, it's a pretty big illegal controversy, but Reagan, the so-called Teflon president, manages to escape by sort of claiming, I didn't know what was going on. And so, kind of a bad look for him. He doesn't seem to be in control of his own White House, but maybe he was innocent and didn't actually know a whole lot about it. Either way, Reagan is going to be a cold warrior. He's going to be much more assertive, much more aggressive, much more bellicose. That would mean warlike. He's not going to just be content with containment. He also wants to roll back communism at some points. And then Reagan is going to increase defense spending. So you may have read about things like Star Wars, the Missile Defense System, or SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative. Reagan is going to spend goo gobs of money on the American military. He's going to spend money on space lasers. Never actually gets off the ground, but it spends a lot of money and it freaks the Soviets out. He is also going to spend a lot of money on updating America's nuclear arsenal, and therefore forcing the Soviet Union to spend a bunch of money. And if the United States can afford to do it, the Soviet Union should be able to as well, except no. And so some scholars, and you can legitimately argue this, is going to say that Reagan helps end the Cold War by spending the Soviets into the ground. Interesting. But there's also some other reasons, and this is kind of a little bit more of a world history thing, but be aware that there are other reasons the Cold War ends. One of which is going to be the Solidarity movement. There's protests in Eastern Europe and places like Cuba. There's the relaxing of tensions and the opening of the Soviet Union in these things called Glasnost and Perestroika, led by the Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev. And Gorbachev is going to allow more information to come in. He's going to be a bit more open. And he's going to allow people to buy more things from the West. And as soon as people find out that they can buy Levi jeans, go to McDonald's, and have all the Western consumer goods that they want, and they're not getting censored by listening to American television or whatever, then they start to really, really, really want some more. So be aware that that is happening as well. We're going to see the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. So that's going to happen under George H.W. Bush. Kind of happens accidentally, but that's a very big symbol. That's one of the potential ways that the Cold War ends. Then the USSR dissolves in 1991, and it becomes just Russia, and then all of the stands and Eastern Europe, etc. So the Cold War ends kind of quietly, a little bit with a whimper almost. Like it was this really, really intense thing, and then suddenly now it's over. The question is, of course, was the U.S. going to get a peace dividend? As in, holy cow, we've been spending a lot of money on the military. Do we now get to take all that money we were spending to keep up with the Soviets and pour it into our domestic stuff? Well, it turns out not so much. We're going to continue to spend a whole bunch of stuff because there are new challenges ahead. And we have some options. Some of these you can talk about, things like Operation Desert Storm. The United States, as the Cold War is ending, before the Soviet Union dissolves, but they're well on their way out, they are going to enforce sort of an idea of you can't just invade your neighbor to take their oil, Saddam Hussein of Iraq. And so the United States leads that, kind of becoming a little bit like big stick Roosevelt, but except not just Roosevelt corollary, it's almost worldwide. So there's some interesting comparisons there. The United States should be the world's policeman. As the world's only superpower after the Cold War, is it our responsibility to be able to enforce stuff no matter where we are? And then there's some other ones, especially during the 1990s, talking about things like Somalia, Rwanda, Kosovo. Should the United States get involved to stop the Rwandan genocide, to stop the Somali civil war? This is the Black Hawk Down incident. Kosovo, someone was talking about in the chat, the breakup of Yugoslavia and Balkanization. The United States gets involved there to stop ethnic cleansing and genocide. Is that the United States' role? Well, there are some discussions about that and a lot of controversy. So that would be the end of the Cold War. That's the political stuff we need to be aware of. Let's do some practice questions. And I'm going to check on some of these good questions that you've been asking so far. So, somebody asked, I'm taking the paper exam and I tend to write kind of big and a lot. Just curious how many pages the test booklet gives. Technically, you can ask for more paper on the short answer question, but I would advise against it. It's short, so keep it short. And try to write a little bit smaller for the short answer question if that's an issue. But for the LEQ and DBQ, you have a ton of room. I think the packets that they give you are maybe 16 pages. I've never seen anyone fill it all the way up, and I've seen some rather large handwriting. So you're fine. You're fine. I wouldn't worry about that. And then someone asked, is the moral majority the same as Nixon's silent majority? No, it is not, although there are some interesting overlaps there. So Nixon's silent majority is like, hey, let's talk about all the people in the middle of America who aren't against the war and don't participate in protests and aren't part of the civil rights movement. And they kind of just want things to go back to normal, the status quo. Whereas the moral majority is founded by Jerry Falwell. It's all about the religious right. So this would be a lot of white evangelical Christians or white fundamentalist Christians who are all about issues like prayer in public schools, outlawing abortion, protecting traditional definitions of marriage, so being sort of anti-LGBT in that way, who want the United States to be able to protect things. I mean, later on it's even going to be like, protecting 10 commandments in courthouses and things like that. So moral majority is a Christian right conservative group. So, and then Alexis asked, are the papers lined or blank? They are definitely lined, so very helpful. Keep yourself all organized. That's good. And then Eben asks, did the Republicans' House majority end with Obama's supermajority? That is a good question. I don't think so. I believe that when was Nancy Pelosi Speaker of the House for the first time? Was that in 2006, perhaps? Could be. Either way, it does not last forever. That is for sure, although it is for much of the 1990s. Feel free to look that up, and if someone wants to look that up and put that in the chat, that'd be really interesting to know. And you absolutely can't skip lines, so you have room. Yep. If you'd like to, that'd be fine. All right, so some practice short stimulus-based multiple choice questions. Let me open up a poll for you so that way you can vote on some of this. So, a speech by Ronald Reagan, July 1981. He says, "Your voices have been heard, millions of you, Democrats, Republicans, and independents from every profession, trade, and line of work, and from every part of this land. You sent a message that you wanted a new beginning. You wanted to change a too little word. It doesn't sound like much, but it sure can make a difference, changing control by government, to control of government." So, go ahead and vote in the poll. What do you think? Does this represent... The ideas in the speech reflect which of the following? A, conservatism, B, environmentalism, C, containment, or D, Cold War rhetoric? We got some options. Go ahead and vote in the poll down below. If you are watching this later, of course, you can quiz yourself and think about what answer you would want. One of the things that I always like to have us look at is, do we need the stimulus with this question? And I think the answer is maybe, because, I mean, if I know my history, I know Ronald Reagan, and I associate him with two different things. Sort of assertive Cold War policy and conservative politics. So that, to me, makes me go, okay, probably not going to be letter B. Doesn't seem like it's relevant. He's talking about the government. He's talking a lot about politics. It doesn't seem like he's talking about the Cold War, so maybe I'm going to go with not C or D. Maybe I am instead going to go with letter A, and bingo. That's what most of you answered. That's the correct answer. Nice job. Letter A. I think we're all good to go. So there you go. Look at this. Most of you, all of you who voted, answered letter A, so nice work there. Let's go on to the second one. 2, which of the following represents an outcome of the ideas expressed in the excerpt? Okay, so the same ideas, conservative political ideas. What is an outcome of this? Let me open up the poll for you again. Is it the end? Does this result? Do conservative political policies result in the end of the Cold War during the Bush 41 administration, the expansion of the military during the late Cold War, the firing of striking Patco workers by Reagan, or the lowering of taxes in the early 1980s? Well, gee, those all sound like conservative policies. Okay, so in this case, I definitely need the excerpt, because even if I know about Reagan, he did all those things. And all those things could potentially be right answers if it was just, hey, what sounds conservatives, right? Or what sounds conservative? So we have to go back to the excerpt and be aware of what part of being conservative are we talking about. So we have a variety of answers. We're a little bit more split than last time. Last time it was all unanimous. This time we have a split decision. Let's see what we can do. Stay hydrated while we wait for some more votes to come in. That mango peach iced tea, I tell you. Alrighty, well, here we go. Looks like most of us chose the correct answer, which is letter D. Nice job. The lowering of taxes in the early 1980s. Which of those is going to involve cutting the government the most? I would say, hey, it's a good job that we didn't answer A and B. It seems like those ones are more like conservative expansion of government, particularly in the national defense sort of arena. Letter C, I could see that one being a little bit closer. The firing of striking Patco workers by Reagan. But that's not necessarily a shrinking of government as much as it is the government not taking control more of the labor market and weakening unions. Whereas D, lowering of taxes. Why do you lower taxes? Because the government needs to be starved, or at least make it made a little bit smaller. And the way you do that is by taking away some of its money. Alrighty. Well, nice job, folks. Thank you for helping that out. Here we go. So a changing economy. Let's talk about some last stuff in period 9. This is going to be kind of some broad, overarching stuff. The economy is changing. You see 2 pictures right there, some of which look like my first cell phone. I won't tell you exactly how old I am, but I will say that my first cell phone is one of those that's in that picture on the left-hand side. Hey-ho! And then on the right-hand side, we obviously have a rusting old steel mill of some sort. So let's talk about what that looks like. First of all, globalization is a big deal. You may have studied this in AP World. If you did AP World before, you know about globalization. If not, well, you can look at the root word. It's global. The idea there is the economy is becoming increasingly interconnected, and that means that, Americans are increasingly having to compete with other countries. So a lot of that means things like deindustrialization. A lot of the manufacturing jobs are going to go overseas or be overtaken by automation. There we go. The Rust Belt is going to become a thing. And the Rust Belt refers to the manufacturing hubs of places like Detroit and Pittsburgh and Cleveland, largely in the upper Midwest, that end up being closed and downtrodden, thus the whole rusting idea. But service sector and tech jobs, the United States is going to be changing from a manufacturing giant to more of a service sector, post-industrial kind of place where there's a lot of tech jobs, a lot of service jobs. This involves things like healthcare. This is going to involve things like, well, all the technology we're going to talk about. Let's talk about those service and tech jobs. So things like computers, phones, internet, all of that, and then also income inequality. I mean, think about the stuff that you know, right? The gig economy. We're gonna see this contrast between like tech moguls like your Mark Zuckerbergs and your Bill Gates and your Elon Musks versus your gig workers, your underpaid people that make the iPhones in China, but also some of those same tech workers who aren't paid super well here in the United States. In fact, we talked about this a little bit last time, but income inequality and wealth inequality is going to skyrocket during period 9. American workers' purchasing power peaked in 1973 or so, and the minimum wage had its maximum purchasing power in 1968. So essentially, even though American productivity has gone up like crazy, American workers really haven't gotten a raise since the early 1970s. That didn't work out so well. So income inequality is a huge issue, and that's going to lead to social tensions that we'll see a little bit later. We're going to see migration and immigration change in the 1990s and in the 2000s. So check out that pie chart from Wikipedia. This is talking about where new legal permanent residents are coming from. A lot of them coming from the Americas. This is not surprising at all, right? A lot of them coming from Mexico. A lot of them coming from other areas in Latin America. We'll get specifics in just a second. But a lot of them coming from Asia as well. And so we're going to see a lot of people from China, from India, and then it's no longer nearly as many Africans and Europeans like we saw in our very, very earlier periods. So, what's some of the internal migrations? Well, the growth of the Sun Belt, we talked about that last time. Sun Belt meaning the southern United States, so South Carolina through California, kind of those kind of areas, and southernization, not in the sense of the article that you may have read in AP World, but southernization as in southern culture, like NASCAR, country music, become a really big thing. And they start to spread throughout the United States. We're also going to see changing immigration, like I mentioned, Latin America. Those 3 countries are known as the Northern Triangles, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. We're going to see those ones become more and more of a source of American immigration, which you know to this day. Discussions about border walls and immigration, and a lot of that has to do with U.S. policies during the Cold War and even before with imperialism that destabilized some of those countries. Plenty of immigration from Asia, as we talked about. So the debates. Well, there's going to be debates after 9/11 with like scary, scary Middle Eastern peoples and some xenophobia that pops up after 9/11. Ooh, not fun. There's going to be discussion of amnesty with Reagan, right? I mean, Reagan is going to pardon some of these people, put them on a path to citizenship, which doesn't seem like a conservative Republican thing to do. But keep in mind, there is some complexity and some CCOT. Reagan would not be elected as a Republican today. He would just not get the nomination for a variety of reasons. And then Obama is going to do the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, right? That controversial thing that was saying, hey, if you were brought here as a kid undocumentedly, it obviously wasn't your fault. So let's give you legal status, enable you to work because you've been a productive member of society and help out. So immigration, migration, another big topic. Then we got challenges of the 21st century, particularly ones that are overseas, and we'll talk about some ones that are at home as well. So just let me list a couple of those. You can come up with some examples. Perhaps you remember some of these. Perhaps you've studied some of these, and you folks are too young to remember 9/11, which is just really sad. It makes me feel old. So the election of 2000 is very controversial, right? And it's another example of when a Democrat is going to win the popular vote but lose the Electoral College, or at least allegedly. There's still some controversy about that, right? Because it all comes down to Florida and counting the ballots, and they're confusing, and Bush ends up winning because of a Supreme Court case that stops the recount after about 500 votes. But there were some questionable calls happening, right? And I'm not talking about like the conspiracy theories of like the 2020 stop the steal election and that kind of nonsense. I'm talking about legitimate questions as to like, did this person mean to vote for Bush or for Gore? It's hard to tell based on this ballot. Or were a lot of black and brown voters illegitimately denied the vote in Florida because of their sketchy voter ID laws and other things like that? There were some questions. But George H.W. Bush becomes president. He's going to start things like No Child Left Behind, trying some new governmental educational programs from the federal level. And then, of course, 9/11 is going to take over all this stuff. So the war on terror begins with 9/11. I would know the basics of that and know how that changes the United States. So we're going to see things like not only the war on terror in terms of taking the fight to Afghanistan and Iraq, but also the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Patriot Act. This is going to lead to changes on the home front. The reason that we have the TSA, the reason you have to take your shoes off at the airport and go through all those metal detectors. It used to be much simpler at the airport. We already mentioned getting into Afghanistan and Iraq, so post-Cold War foreign policy challenges. And of course, you folks are familiar with some of these, like ISIS and the rise of China and a resurgent Russia. So ISIS, you're familiar with. That's just another example of the U.S. fight, continuing the war on terror, and perhaps it being caused by U.S. involvement in places like Iraq and Syria. And we're putting the Russian jokes back on the table, folks, because we have to talk about how China and Russia are both considered dominant powers on the rise, and they're coming back during the 21st century. The Cold War is over, but perhaps there's going to be a second Cold War with either China or Russia in a certain way. There are some more challenges of the 21st century that we can mention. A couple of them being a lot of domestic issues like Hurricane Katrina that hits New Orleans, devastates New Orleans. It kind of highlights the dangers of climate change to the United States with worsening hurricanes. It highlights some racial disparities. Some people claim that the Bush administration didn't respond fast enough because it predominantly affected some poor black and brown areas. So some of that stuff is going to be a big deal. We'll see that coming back later. There's the Great Recession of 08-09 caused by inflated housing prices and the bailouts and all those kinds of things. There's Obergefell. That's the Supreme Court case that legalizes gay marriage during the Obama administration. Other things during Obama would be like the Affordable Care Act, and otherwise known as Obamacare. So healthcare debates, right? Debates over fracking and oil. Do you do this because it reduces the U.S. dependency on foreign oil? Or do you not do it because it's terrible for the environment? Got options and debates. Citizens United, how much money should we be allowed to have in politics? This is the one that says money equals free speech, therefore turns on the spigots of campaign donations. And then plenty of protest movements like Occupy Wall Street, the Tea Party, the Black Lives Matter protests. Now we're getting really, really close to the present, so you're familiar with some of these things too. So, a lot of different debates. Feel free to come up with different examples. If you don't like these ones, there are other ones as well. But just be aware the United States continues to debate various foreign and domestic policy issues, including gun control with D.C. versus Heller, the handgun one. So there's lots of other ones. Those of you that are doing AP Gov stuff, you know some of this as well. So let's do some Period 9 practice short answer questions, shall we? So here we go. First question would be this. Briefly explain one specific foreign policy challenge facing the U.S. after the end of the Cold War, and much like we've done before, I'm going to get you a Mentimeter idea, so that way we can, I'm going to reload this a second, so that way we can participate together. So, here we go. We made it through all the content. Nice work. Now it's time to test our knowledge a little bit. And so go to menti.com, as you can see at the top there. Use the code 57527400. And I'd like you to drop some vocab about foreign policy changes facing the U.S. after the end of the Cold War. So menti.com, Thomasina's putting it in the chat, code 57527400. And then once you do that, you are able to add in your own vocab. You may submit up to 3 different pieces of vocab. And we're going to turn this into a word cloud because I'm curious as to what you would say. So menti.com, use this code. I don't want to keep it up there too long because I don't want us to see all of the word cloud and thus just use other people's vocab words, right? So give an example or 2 or 3 of foreign policy vocab that talks about challenges facing the U.S. after the end of the Cold War. We got some good stuff coming in. All right, I'm going to hide it for right now. Just a reminder, as we're continuing to think of different vocab to put in there, with short answer questions, we're going to be talking about that in 2 streams from now. When we talk about FRQs part 1, we're going to talk about all about the different types of SAQs you're going to encounter on the exam, whether it's paper or digital. And then we're going to talk about strategies for answering that. We're going to go through the ACE strategy that perhaps you use that you've heard before, the answer site explained, talk about how to answer them succinctly but also well. For right now, we're just listing vocab. We're not actually doing the full-on ACE answering. So we're looking for foreign policy challenges facing the U.S. after the end of the Cold War. Let's go back and see what we have in the Menti word cloud. Alrighty. A lot of us are talking about the war on terror. Yes. Nice job. Talking about doing... Oh, okay. Foreign policy challenges like climate agreements. Like the Paris Climate Accords. Excellent, excellent. Black Hawk Down in Somalia, military spending, immigration. Immigration is a foreign policy concern, right? Especially when it comes to those Northern Triangle countries. Absolutely. Absolutely. We also have conservatism. So that's going to be a foreign policy challenge. Yep. So perhaps it's some conservative policies that lead to this. So George H.W. Bush invading Iraq and Afghanistan thanks to large foreign policy, but also even Bill Clinton getting involved or not involved in places like Rwanda or the Balkans or things like that. Yeah, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. Those areas, resurgence of China, 9/11 in general, cyber attacks. Yeah, you're mentioning some stuff that we haven't even talked about. That's definitely still going on. Some nice work there. Absolutely. Absolutely. Lots of tensions. The Arab Spring. Hey, another great example. Tariffs, Middle Eastern oil, stuff like that. Peacekeeping forces. A lot of good options. Yeah, nice job. Nice job. I'm going to close the voting for now and move on to our next question. So our next question, letter B, briefly explain one specific domestic policy challenge facing the U.S. from 1990 to 2010. So a domestic policy challenge. Domestic policy challenge. Domestic meaning at home. What's a challenge the United States faces? Same place, same code. Menti.com 57527400. Drop a vocab word about domestic policy challenges. I'm going to hide the results from the very beginning here and just leave this on the screen for us as we think. So foreign policy, we got a whole bunch of stuff. And again, you want to make things easier for you, right? So if it fits and you want to use 9/11 because you're like, hey, I know about that. It's a big event right at the top of my brain. And I don't have to think too hard about it, and I can explain a whole lot about it. Awesome. Use 9/11. Don't make it harder on yourself than you have to be. But then when it comes to domestic policy, maybe you can go with something you know. Perhaps you're already familiar with some domestic policy challenges in the United States. And it does go till 2010, so it's not talking about today. So you shouldn't use Black Lives Matter. But you could say, Black Lives Matter was protesting racism. Did we still have racism earlier before that? Oh yeah, it turns out we did. So maybe you could talk about some of that. So you have some options. All right, the results are pouring in. It looks like we have 18 of them so far. Excellent, excellent, excellent. 19. More and more. Remember, you can answer more than once. And yes, we're talking about the Arab Spring, the Facebook movement. Yes, social media plays a really big role in that. Nice job. Somebody was asking, what is the Tea Party? And it's a little bit related to, I guess we could put it in 2010. The Tea Party, that would be sometimes it stands for the Taxed Enough Already Party, or sometimes it just refers to the Boston Tea Party. And in that case, this is saying the U.S. government has become too tyrannical, almost like the King of England was back in the day. And it was a conservative protest against Obama. And yeah, there was definitely some racism involved in the Tea Party as well. So it's kind of hard to separate out I think Obama raised my taxes too much, and I think Obama is a secret Muslim terrorist who's not a legitimate U.S. citizen. And like, whoa, racism and xenophobia much? So the Tea Party was a really controversial part of the 2010 election cycle, with some people accusing it of being astroturfing, as in like it was fake grassroots because it's funded by the Koch brothers and stuff like that. The idea there being it's a conservative movement, sort of the opposite of Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street's a bunch of liberals going, government, get involved and help cut the corporations down to size. And then the Tea Party says, hey, government, cut yourself down to size. And also Obama, boo. So, complex like a lot of stuff we've talked about. All right, man, we got so many answers. Let's see them. Oh, my goodness. All right. Domestic policy challenges. Now, remember, some of these are absolutely correct, but remember that we want to get as specific as we can when it comes to vocab. So, LGBTQ rights, very good as a topic. Give a specific example of that. You don't want to talk about Obergefell, because that's 2015, but you could talk about DOMA, you could talk about Don't Ask, Don't Tell, something like that. You could talk about Massachusetts legalizing gay marriage, etc. So we're getting there. Let's see. We got the Patriot Act, big deal. Climate change, yes. Gay marriage in general, yes. Racism, again, come up with some specific examples, right? Your Rodney King riots, etc. Hurricane Katrina. Did someone say Hurricane Tortilla? Or is that just silly people in the chat? Uh-oh. Income inequality, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Voting rights, yes. Continuing arguments about abortion, absolutely. Farm subsidies, tax cuts, Guantanamo Bay, domestic terrorism, yes. Remember, domestic terrorism is a really, really big deal, including, obviously today as well, but back then too. Think Timothy McVeigh, Oklahoma City bombing. Oh boy, not good. So yeah, a lot of different options there. Let's go back then to letter C. Now this is why it's often handy, and I know I cheated because I just showed one at a time, but this is why it's a good idea to read the entire question before you start diving in and answering all the questions, right? Briefly explain one specific policy proposal to address the challenge mentioned in Part B. Oh, okay. So, are you able to use the one you had in Part B to be able to talk about a proposal to address it in Part C? Boy, that would be rather tricky. Yeah. All right. So, could we do that? Well, we have a whole bunch of answers. And so, stop making fun of me for being not hip with the kids. I know the Vine with the kid and the... Yeah, but I was just making sure that we were joking around correctly. Because, people die with Hurricane Katrina. We don't want to be too jokey about it. But I understand the reference. I'm not that old, people. So, let's talk about this. What was a piece of specific policy trying to address a challenge from the previous question? We already got some in the chat. Someone was saying if you did 9/11, you could talk about the Patriot Act. Wonderful. Let me hide the results for right now. Give me an example of a policy proposal that could address a challenge from the previous question. So, previous question, we were talking all about different kinds of challenges. Okay. But also, can we come up with policy proposals that address those challenges? So notice you have a whole bunch of different options for letter B, but depending on what you know, you might want to choose one that you actually know a policy proposal connection to. Right? That'd be a good idea. Oh man, we forgot to do our hydration and posture check, so make sure we're doing good. We got just a few more minutes left, but we want to make sure that our backs are staying nice and straight. String out of the head. La la la. Voice is staying nice and good, staying stretched. Back is feeling okay as we're typing in our answers. Policy proposals addressing domestic challenges. The results are coming on in. They're currently hidden, but I can see them. They're coming on in. Appreciate you folks. You're doing a really great job. All right, I'm going to start showing some of those. There's a little bit of delay though, so feel free to continue to add on. And again, if you're watching this later, you can still certainly quiz yourself, right? You can use this as a practice exam, and then you can use some of these as an option for later. So, boom. Tons of people use the Patriot. Hey, Vikram already talked about that in the chat. You're stealing his ideas. Oh, yes. Okay, so we have Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Paris Climate Accords. Obamacare. NAFTA. Yes, we can. No Child Left Behind. DACA. Citizens United. Yes. Obamacare, the ACA. Hillary Care from the 1990s. All right, yeah. DOMA. Yes, a lot of different policy proposals. Nice job. Bunch of really good ones as well. All right. We're going to close the voting for now, but nice job. Just to give you a brief preview of what we're going to do next time, here's an example using the ACE method, right? So the United States faced a challenge of where to intervene militarily. This is going back to A with foreign policy. And then I gave an example about the Balkans attempting to keep the peace between warring factions during the Civil War. And then the last sentence I think is the most crucial after you drop a vocab, because you want to define the vocab, of course, but you want to tell me how it answers the question. This action represented the U.S. decision as the world's sole superpower to stay involved in the affairs of the world even after the Cold War. So notice this is sort of like the United States deciding to do international affairs after World War II and not retreat back into isolationism, but it's happening even after the Cold War ends. So that's kind of a way to do it. You keep it short, you keep it simple, you have about 3 sentences, and you move along because it's a short answer. So, questions. Let me double check our question and answer section. We've talked about the Arab Spring. Someone was asking, what is the Arab Spring? Remember, Arab Spring would be when a bunch of countries in the Middle East are gaining their independence from dictators, more democracy. Starts in Tunisia, spreads over social media, etc. Yeah, let's keep going, and I'll just finish up with the recommendations for studying as you ask any last-minute questions. So here we go. A reminder to use historical thinking skills. We will cover those in depth in the next stream about APUSH exam tests, tips and tricks. So remember to use all of those to think about how you can structure questions, how you can structure your studying. Make sure that you're using active recall. The idea there being quiz yourself. Don't just reread your notes. Of course, watch Fiveable. We're here. You can rewatch this as many times as you want to see my ridiculous face and my annoying voice. Use those historical thinking skills, and here's a couple examples. You could compare Clinton and Reagan. Reagan is a Democrat. Clinton is a Democrat. Reagan's a Republican, but they both have some conservative ideas, and yet they definitely have some different ideas as well. So you could compare and contrast those guys. Okay. You could talk about the causes and the effects of the war on terror. Whole bunch of options there. And notice we're doing cause and effect. So, hey-o, watch cause and effect means that you're going to be able to get complexity. And yes, oh no, Kayla, yeah, we switched the time. We have a couple of those coming up, and I'll put that in the slides. But yeah, if you're watching this and you thought it started at 9, that's okay. You can always watch the recording. Thanks for joining us at the very end. Ask your questions now, quick. A great CCOT question could be technology's role in the economy. I mean, we could be talking about back here. Wait, Harrison, are you just making fun of me because I had a typo because I spelled Mujahideen incorrectly or something like that? Now you got me all paranoid about my spelling. Oh boy. I thought I spelled it correctly. Maybe we're just laughing because it sounds like a funky word. Well, either way, let's move on to this one. Technology's role in the economy. So, cell phones, internet, social media, you get it. You've lived through some of this stuff. It's all technology. That could be SFI if they ask you about technology's role in the economy. So, a couple more practice questions if you want to sort of outline this. Almost use it as like a long essay question. So, compare and contrast. You could do the New Deal versus Reaganomics, immigration after 1965 and Hart-Celler versus earlier. You could talk about the end of the Cold War, domestic policy disagreements, what causes all of that, economic shifts that are happening, deindustrialization, migration, what's causing people to move where and why, economic changes, demographic changes, all sorts of changes that are happening that we talked about today. You could structure those as a CCOT. Well, Dan's asking the important questions to us, and he says, how important is this unit? Well, Dan, that's a complicated question. I would give it has to be a two-parter question. One, are you going to have a massive amount of questions from this period on the test? No. Could you have an SAQ? Yes. Could you have a DBQ? No, not solely from this unit. How many multiple choice questions are you going to have? I don't know. My guess would be 3 to 5. But at the same time, for life, for importance of being a citizen, and knowing about recent world events, this is pretty darn important. Part of that's recency bias, of course, but part of it is a lot of this stuff is really influencing your lives to this day on a daily basis. So I would definitely be familiar with period 9. But don't spend hours and hours and hours studying for the APUSH exam for period 9. So good question in that regard. All right, well, folks, we are out of time, and so thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. We got all the way through period 9. We are done with all of the content in APUSH. You have now mastered it all. You have done all of the APUSH content, perhaps maybe not in class, but we've certainly reviewed it all. That's awesome. And yeah, we have a couple more streams. A reminder about some things that are coming up. So first of all, we have APUSH Trivia. Test your APUSH Trivia tomorrow. And then keep in mind, we do have some changes in the times, right? So next week, we're at 7 o'clock for exam tips and tricks. Then we have Tuesday back at 9 o'clock again. But then we have Friday at 8 for FRQs Part 2. And then we have the CRAM finale. Awesome. So we got a whole bunch of fantastic streams still coming, even though we are done with the content. And of course, you want to keep the conversation going in Discord, because Thomasina, our amazing TA, is going to be presiding over that discussion happening right after this in the Discord APUSH channel. Awesome. It should be really good. Kayla, thank you for joining us, even for the last couple of minutes. And I hope you enjoy watching the replay. And then, folks, again, as always, you got this. Stay confident. You're awesome. Hope you have a